So you have to add this 3D car to this photograph. They've given you the photo and the HDR, and your job is to bring the car into the photographic world. We jump to Maya, we set the project. First thing we're going to do is create the camera. I'm going to raise it up 106 centimeters, and I'm going to rotate it down in X just a little bit, because that is what I know the camera, about the angle that the camera was at. And so that's just a good starting place from the beginning. Then, in the Attribute Editor, I'm going to add the image plane. This is my preferred method for adding image planes for compositing. For modeling, I might use any of the other methods of creating an image plane, but for compositing, I still like this one because it just has a few more controls that make sense with the image plane for this. I go to grab the photograph. Boom. I want to be able to look through this camera and have it fit my resolution and my film gate. And right now it doesn't fit either one. So I'm going to open up my render settings, and my photo is 4000 by 3000. So I set that, and you can see, boom, already it's fitting my resolution gate, but not my film gate. So I'm going to take the device aspect ratio, since it's 4 by 3, 1.33, in my attribute editor for the camera. I'm going to set the film aspect ratio to the aspect ratio of my image. And then jump back to the image plane, and I like to tell it to fit to resolution gate, and I'll also turn on that mask. I'll give myself 2 panels. So now I'm ready to model the geometry of this desktop. And that's just going to be a cube. Create polyprimitive cube, raise it up, scale it up, flatten it down, and start moving it into position. I'm going to do one more thing with this image plane. I'm going to scoot it back, because right now, as I get this to be a pretty big object, it's only 100 centimeters away from the camera. So I'm going to set that to, I don't know, 2000. 2000, there we go. So already it feels like it has the right sort of spacing, or the right scale to the room in terms of the way it moves through it. But I need to line the camera up to match this. One of the mistakes a lot of people make is they start changing the cube to try and match it to the, they start trying to change the cube to try and match it to the desktop. That's not what you want to do. You want to actually adjust the camera, and the first thing you want to think about is the vanishing points of the image you have. And you can see the vanishing points off into this direction. So this is going to be one of our main lines of perspective that we want to match. Now, you can try your best to match it in here, and you can sort of get a pretty quick, wow, that was actually shockingly lucky. It's never usually that quick from this. I'm going to quickly throw a bookmark on that, or 3. The first 3 are going to be that. But the fine tuning, you can see it's really fiddly to get that in the last little bit. So that's when, rather than tumble around in the viewport, I grab the rotate for the camera and very gently start to adjust, trying to get the edges. And at this point, I'm going to be typing in to the attribute, into the channel box. Rotate Y. Let's try -11. It's still a little too far down this way. So at this point, I might do just a little Z rotation. Z is always what you want to do last. You try not to ever have any Z rotation when you're holding the camera. You're trying to get it as flat as possible. But we are human, so we're always off by a teeny bit. And then I'll move it over. I'm going to go to world. instead of object for a moment, because I want to raise my camera up just a hair. There, so now I'm sinking that down a little so that fits better into where that is in the world. I was lining it up with the bottom of the cube. It needs to be lined up with the top of the cube. Okay, so now I've got that nicely lined up. So I am zooming out. What I'm not liking about this right now is that this board is about the right proportion in the real world, but way off when it fits just here. So I know that scale's not right. It should be something much more like this. So that means my camera's pretty much in the wrong place. So I'm going to go back and try again. Maybe move my camera away a little bit. That feels much better in terms of getting this object with the right dimensions scaled into the photograph. That means my car is going to move along the desktop much more realistically, or fit in if it does any movement across the plane. Okay, I really like that. That looks like a great fit. My camera is set. I'm going to bookmark it. Then I lock all of its channels. Lock selected. There we go. Now I can't move that camera anymore, and that's a good thing. Next thing I want to do is assign the matte shadow shader. So I can assign new material, Arnold, and standard surface is there, but looks like the matte shadow is not. So I have to go to the hypershade, Arnold, and I'll click on shader so I have fewer to choose from. Makes it easier to find. And the aiShadowMatte, and I'm going to middle mouse drag that onto the object. And now when I render, well, I'll need a light, so I'm going to bring in my HDR. I go to Arnold, light, sky dome light, and again the attribute editor, color. Click on the checker box to bring up the file texture option, and in the file texture goes our HDR. Boom. And it looks very weird, so we'll select the HDR, and there we go, select the HDR, and we're going to tell it to not be visible in camera because we don't want to see it. So that's step one. There we go. And now you can see with the matte shadow shader, we're getting this camera projected right onto this object. So that's good. I'm going to do a quick test. I'll grab a cube. It's rendering the cube that I just added, but it's not rendering my shadow catching plate. Now you can see this is throwing off a nice shadow, but it's going the wrong way. All the other shadows are on this diagonal. This shadow's on this diagonal. So I'm going to grab my HDR and rotate it. There we go. The shadow's coming in a little more on the same angle. I'm going to scale this down to make it a little easier just to see its shadows against the other guy's shadows. Okay, that's about the right angle. But there is one issue when I look at the shadow. This is getting the shadow from a very large light source. You can tell because the light's wrapping around, so you get this triangular shadow in the center, and this is soft and this is soft. But these are all hard edge shadows. So although the color is really nice from this HDR, and it makes it really feel like it's there, the shadow is wrong. So I'm actually going to turn off cast shadows for my HDR, and then I'm going to add a directional light. Create light, directional light. That's going to imitate the sun, because when you look at the HDR, you can see the sun is coming in really strong through this window. Now in Maya, this whole window area is acting like a giant area light. That's why the light source is so large. But what I really want is those parallel light rays from the sun casting those hard shadows. And no, the sun's light rays are not actually parallel, but by the time they get to us, they might as well be because they're so far away. I'll move this over and scale it up just so it's a little easier to work with. And I think that might do. Let's test that render. Okay, so now you can see we're getting these nice long shadows. This mouse shadow is about that long, and this is taller than that mouse. So we got to change the X rotation of the sun to give it a longer shadow. I'm going to get rid of my Z rotation and make the X -10. There we go. And that's a pretty long shadow, so maybe -15. That feels good. Like in relationship to the mouse, that shadow's almost twice as long, but not quite, so maybe, yeah, that feels good. So now I've got my lights set up, the shadows are matching. I'm going to delete my stand-in cube, and I'm going to go grab my car, and I'm going to reference it in File, Reference Editor, Reference, Create Reference, and I like to use selected namespace. The second option for the string, because I don't like the whole file name, it makes the name too long, and I use the shortest name I can, in this case C for car. And I'll go get my car, reference it in, yeah, just get it set in place, and I'm going to render that again. Okay, it looks way too dark, and it looks like it's a little above the board. So I'm just going to lower it down till the wheels, and maybe move it forward a little. Okay, so it's got a nicely shaped shadow. It's about the same size as the mouse and similar size shadow. I'm not too worried that the mouse shadow is denser than the car. We'll figure that out in a bit. It's about to get even lighter. We're going to be rendering that shadow in its own light group, so that'll be a much stronger shadow. So I want the car to be brighter, and that means I want to grab intensity of the sky, or exposure, and let's go with 4. And that's too bright. That feels pretty good. And you can see that filled in this shadow even more, so it's even less dense. So now we're ready to set up our AOVs and our light groups and render layers. So render settings. Oh, yeah, I want my renders to go a lot faster, so I'm going to turn on maintain width height ratio. And I'm going to drop this down to 1000, and that'll automatically correct the height as well, and that's just going to speed up my process. I'm going to turn my diffuse down to 1 just because I know that I've got coat on this and specular, and so I'm getting almost no diffuse off this car. And I'm going to go to my AOVs and grab the ones I want. Actually, first one I'm going to make is the ambient occlusion, add custom, and I'm going to call it AO shader. I can't see that little window, so I grab this over, and again, Arnold shader ambient occlusion. And now I've got my ambient occlusion AOV set up, and I'm going to add coat, because this is a car obviously, so coat is on, and I'll add diffuse just so we can see it. There's no emission, there's no sheen. I need specular. No subsurface scattering, but there is transmission. I actually use most of these, but sometimes you need them. This will allow me to rebuild the entire render from these AOVs if I need to. For the object, I try to use the beauty, but sometimes you just need a little extra, so here they are. Let's check out what we've got in the render. And we look at the AOVs. There's the ambient occlusion. We're definitely going to want to get a little more sampling in there. It feels a little grainy. Transmission, that's the transparency for the headlights. We have the specular. You can see there's almost nothing there on the diffuse. That's just the tires. And the coat has a lot of that shininess. And what we're going to want, I'm going to leave this relatively low in terms of render settings because I want fast renders for the getting through this tutorial, but boy, that would need to be jacked up a lot. Those sparklies are just a little too hot. Needs more anti-aliasing. So the other thing I need is my shadows. I've got my shadow shader assigned to this. So let's grab, where's all my other shadows? Not that ShadowMatte. These are the 3 I want. I end up usually just using the shadow, but I like to have the other ones for giggles. Doesn't add time to the render. It adds a little size to the EXR, but I find it's worth it. But if you're worried about disk space, shadow is the only one you probably need. Okay, let's render it and do our tests of what we're getting with that. But as we can see, the shadow's way too faint, so we need to work on that. We're going to make some light groups. Oh, interesting. I can't get shadow mattes with light groups, so that's going to have to be a layer. Okay, hadn't planned on that, but that's okay. We're going to set up the Maya render layers now. Now that we've got our basic AOVs set, and we come here, we're going to hit plus and make a layer. And the first one's going to be object only. And we're going to take the car and grab all of its geometry. And you can see all of its geometry. Rather, I shift click on the top node to open it all so you can see that. I'm going to right click, create collection, and I hit add. I usually don't bother to name my collections. And then I'm going to want the board in there too, but I'm going to change its layer attributes. So I make another collection and add the board or the shadow catching ground plane. I'm going to make this layer the active layer by clicking on the eyeball. So now I'm actually in this layer. That's always very important. You need to have the layer you're working on be the active layer, and you do that by clicking on the eyeball. I'm going to come over to the attribute editor, render stats. I open that up. I'm going to right click on its primary visibility and create absolute override for visible layer and turn it off. I notice it turned red once that was an option. So now when I'm in this layer and I render this layer, we can't see the car. Oh, it's time to actually disconnect our background from the camera. With the camera, we need that background plate while we're matching the camera, but then we don't want it anymore. So I go to Windows, Node Editor, there's my camera selected, I graph its inputs and outputs, and there's the image plane shape going into it, and I'm going to delete it. So now I'm not getting that in the render, I'm getting just the car all by itself. And if I go to its alpha, there it is, it's got a nice clean alpha, not that we'll need it, but there it is. And it has its own ambient occlusion. It won't give us any shadow because these are all just from the matte shadow shader. But there's its transmission, specular, what little diffuse we get from that, and coat. So now we're going to want the shadow. And we're going to want the shadow from just the light. So we're going to want to have the object in this next layer. And we're going to turn off the primary visibility of the object. And then we're going to turn off the sky dome so that we'll only be getting this light casting the shadow. And that'll be the shadow layer. So I make a new layer. I'm going to call it Sunshad. Once again, I'm going to grab the car, make a new collection, add the car in, and I'm going to make this the active layer. And you can see that board just disappeared because it's not in this layer yet. And the attribute editor, I'm going to right click on primary visibility, create absolute override, turn it off. Boom. And then I'm going to go grab the cube, add it. Now when I add it, I should be able to see the AO of just the car. There's the ambient occlusion. And the shadow and the beauty in the alpha is our shadow. We're not going to see it in the RGB because it's a shadow and it's black, but it shows up in the alpha like it's supposed to. Okay, so that's working. And I'm going to go back to the render layer. Okay, so this is it. I'm going to select my sun, and I'm going to create relative override, and I'm going to turn it off. Whoops, not -0. Actually, I don't need to do that to the exposure, do I? And I'm going to turn it off by turning off the intensity, because the intensity is a multiplier. So now I'm multiplying the exposure by 0. Let's see what that does to our shadow density. Much stronger. But the sampling is a problem. So let's grab our sunlight and increase the samples to about 6. Okay. So to get the sun shadow to work well, I turned off the sky dome light and the sun shadow layer. So now I've got 3 layers: my object only, my sun shadow, and my scene. And I've got my AOVs, ambient occlusion, coat, cryptomatte in case I need to matte something in or out, diffuse shadow, all my shadows, specular and transmission. Okay, ready to render. Oops. Go up to the top. I like to, well, let's save my scene. Save scene as car comp, and file name prefix. I like to right click, insert scene name first, and then I'll put in that slash to make a new folder. I'm going to put insert layer name, and then after that I'll insert scene, and that way when I'm searching a year from now, I'll know when the shadow layer comes up, I'll know what scene it belongs to. I turn off tiled. Zip is good for compression, and I merge AOVs. Otherwise, all those AOVs come out as a different file, and that's just a lot to manage. Shot camera, camera 1. That's my proper width-height ratio. I do like name.number.extension, and even though I'm only going to do 1 frame. I go to render, render sequence options box, and make sure that the camera's correct, and then all render enabled layers are on. And it's going to do 1 image per layer. Each one of those gets its own EXR, and each of those EXRs will have all of those AOVs in. If I was really worried about file size, I'd probably turn off the AOVs I don't need in the shadow, but I'm not caring right now. I jump to After Effects. I'm going to say new comp from footage, car comp, and I can select all 3 of these. Still duration 2 seconds, sure, doesn't matter. Single comp, yes. Okay. Import the background from my source images. There's some problems there. What's going on? So intensity, create absolute override, 0 for that one. Then I'm going to go get my backplate, drop that in, and right away we see it's sized very strangely. And we can also see that our shadow density is pretty problematic. So we're going to fix all of that. We're going to fix the backplate, scale, set it to 25% because that's how big I made it, and do some other things for our comp before I start dealing with the shadows. So project settings, when dealing with images from Maya, EXRs, we want to go to color, set up OCIO color managed, ACES CG, and that automatically sets this to the sRGB SDR video, which is what our render view is in Maya. So we want that to match, and that totally messes with our backplate. And so we need to interpret all of our footage. So the backplate will do first, interpret footage, main, color, and it needs to be set to sRGB SDR. And you can see how much that dimmed it down and set it back to normal. Okay.
And then this we need interpret footage main, and this, needs to be ACES CG. And this also needs to be ACES CG, so interpret footage main, color. Yes, ACES CG, boom. Okay.
I'm not really sure what that's from. Oops, don't want to move that around. So that's bothering me a little because I don't really know where it came from. I may have to end up matting that out. The shadow density needs to match here. Well, first thing we want is actually just the ambient occlusion. So we'll drag extractor onto it. It's over in Effects, 3D Channel Extractor. Ambient occlusion goes down first. And we set it to multiply. And then I'm going to duplicate the layer. Control D. I'm going to take its extractor. And let's look at what's just shadow. That's just shadow. So we're going to turn down the opacity. Now, that color balance is pretty wrong. I don't mind that it's off of that, but, well, interesting. Each of these colors, each of these shadows is a slightly different color. So I think what I'm going to do is add a tint. Scrolling down in the effects, drag that onto this layer, and I'm going to map the black. And now it's interesting, the color's matching much better. Just by changing the black point, it fits in with this one much better. So I'll give that to that. Okay, so now I'm going to drag in the car, drop it on top. Boom, there it is, looking pretty good. I'm not really happy with this shadow area still. I also think it should be a little shinier, so I'm going to duplicate the layer, drop the extractor on it, hit the coat, and say add. Oh, that's a bit much. I'm going to duplicate that layer again and test the AO over it. I'm going to set the ambient occlusion to multiply. Yeah, I think it's better off without that extra coat layer. So now I've got my background plate, the ambient occlusion, that shadow, which I still don't like the shape of. Not really sure why it came out of my eye like that. Then I've got the car, got rid of that coat layer, and its ambient occlusion layer, which I do think helps just a little bit. So in this case, so I'm going to add mask and make sure I'm in the right layer, the sun shadow layer. Go to the pen tool and draw out my tangents. Close it up, and then in my mask I'm going to just invert it. There we go. Adjust that tangent that I messed up. There we go. Okay, so that mask helped that shadow shape a little. I'm not sure quite where that came from in my eye. I'm not going to worry about it today. The core lesson here was for the render layers, getting the object separated from its shadow so we could control the shadow density in After Effects.